What's going on, everybody? The Bills played more nickel than anybody in the NFL last year, and tonight we're going to talk about what that means, who's going to play a role, and how the Bills are going to handle that going forward into 2021. Let's get it. Welcome back, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back here on the Cold Front Report with my compadres. I got EJ Daniels. EJ, it's always a pleasure. How's it going tonight, man? Oh, no.
It's in a row.
You're muted. Go ahead.
Oh. I said another opportunity to speak to Bills Mafia. 2 days in a row on the Cold Front Report. I take all these opportunities very with a lot of care, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Travis Blakesley's back on with us. Travis, it's a pleasure to be back on with you. How you doing, man?
Great. It's a pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, fellas, the Bills have played more nickel than anybody in the NFL over the last 2 seasons. Nickel is base for the Buffalo Bills. It's a 4-3 base defense, but they run nickel 90% of the time, so that's base. And to say the nickel cornerback position is an important one would be an understatement. At least that's what all of us would assume, given the regularity in which the Bills run that package. Their nickel corner as it stands right now today is Terron Johnson. And Terron Johnson, we'll get into how we feel about Terron a little bit later. But the Bills could improve in that position. But tonight we're going to talk about how we feel the Bills have performed over the last couple seasons with that spot, what really would be the ideal fit for that spot in this defense, and what we think of the players they currently have on the roster that can play that role. So for starters, I want to talk to everybody on the panel right now and see what their opinions are as to what the ideal player would be in the Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier secondary to play that nickel corner. EJ, what are your thoughts on this? Who would what player or what skill sets would a player have in your opinion to be ideal in this defense for the Bills?
First and foremost, they would have to be a cornerback that was super shifty, because when you play in a slot, each receiver who's in the slot always has a two-way go, so you have to cover more areas. So you would have to be quick laterally. That's number one. Number two, you would have to have quick feet, obviously, because sometimes teams run a lot of those deep route slot goals. Excuse me. So you would have to be, have quick feet to flip your hips that way also. So that would be my ideal fit. You were talking about which players would be ideal. The Bills had a chance to get Troy Hill from the Rams. I would have loved to see him in this defense. He's been the best slot corner besides Chris Harris Jr. He's been the best slot cornerback in the NFL. And there's an article talking about how slot corners have been devalued. So that is the type of skill set that I would love to see at the slot cornerback. Because you have to be shifty to flip your hips both ways because you have to cover more surface area. So a quicker guy, smaller guy who can run with these smaller receivers definitely would be the type of skill set we'd be looking for in this defense.
Travis, what do you seek out for the Bills nickel corner? What do you think they're really looking for in that spot?
While I agree, somebody with quick feet and it's very twitchy is important because the change of direction is going to be greater out there because you're kind of on an island, like EJ was saying. You don't have the boundary to play off of. You probably don't have anyone on top of you. So being twitchy is non-negotiable as a nickel. But for the Bills, I feel like what they value as it being a base defense is somebody who can really shore up tackles, somebody who can play that hybrid role where, yes, they are a nickel, but also at the same time, they're just splitting the difference between the end of the line of scrimmage and that slot wide receiver. So somebody like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was somebody who I personally felt would have been a great fit. I'm not the coach, but that's where I felt like if we went into that direction rather than getting Rousseau, we would have somebody who we wouldn't be taking off the field. So that tackling ability while being able to go sideline to sideline is very important to me.
Absolutely. And, you were kind of talking about the importance of tackling. That's really something the Bills look for in all their defensive backs, and it's a must for their nickel corner spot as well. I think, not just the Bills nickel corner, but every nickel corner needs to be a very instinctual player because they're a player that you're going to be playing man, you're going to be playing zone. You have two sides in which that receiver can run to. And really for the Bills nickel corner, I really feel like they want a tweener type player. They want a player that can, is capable of sticking their nose in there in the run game. They're capable of running with these receivers. They're capable of sometimes even covering tight ends such as Travis Kelce. They want those guys. They want kind of a tweener player, and two players that come to mind, in my opinion, two players that they sought out in the draft class of last year, Kyle Duggar and Jeremy Chin. They made those players a focal point in their research and all of the pre-draft process. Those are two players that were very important in their pre-draft process. And, they didn't end up being Bills. I'm not saying I wish they ended up being Bills, but just kind of giving you guys an idea of the mold and prototype of player that they kind of look for in that nickel corner spot. If they drafted either of those guys, that would have been the spot that they would have slotted into in day one. They really look for a guy who is instinctual, who can cover his zone, who trust the guys behind them, really, and he's capable of running with defenders on drag routes, running with the receivers on drag routes, running with tight ends, able to check up tight ends. That's kind of, in my opinion, a player that they're really looking for. They have yet to find. I wouldn't say the Bills don't prioritize nickel corner. We really haven't seen them invest much into the position ever since Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott took over. I mean, we haven't seen them invest much into that position, period, aside from Tre'Davious White in 2017. But I wouldn't go as far as to say the Bills don't prioritize that position, considering two higher prospects in last year's draft class for two players that they were really looking at, really going to try and bring in Buffalo. But it just didn't come to fruition. They didn't invest a fourth-round pick in Terron Johnson, and that's how he's here. But I really feel like Terron Johnson, his instincts are lacking to play that nickel corner spot, which is why he really isn't the ideal player to play that spot. But, let's get into who the Bills have in the room right now at nickel corner, speaking of Terron Johnson. Travis, give me your thoughts on Terron Johnson and what he's done in Buffalo so far and what he's going to be capable of doing in 2021. Will he improve from 2020, or is he going to have a season comparable to last year?
Well, the one thing that I can say about Terron Johnson is that positively is that he's always been somebody who, like you said, is never been afraid to tackle. The guy throws his body around, which could be a detriment to himself as his injuries kind of piled up over his career. But that, what also on the other, the yin to that yang would be his inconsistency. There's times where, we saw last year, returning those 2 interceptions for touchdowns. Those are great reads. They weren't, Ben's throw wasn't great, but at least in the playoff game, I mean, that was him. That wasn't a ball that just ended up in his hands. He used his eyes and his body to pick off that pass and take it to the house. But at the same time, more times than not, we've seen him getting beat, and it's a concern. So, do I think he's going to take a next step? I hope so. I think it's possible with the way. Leslie Frazier seems to really like him, and McDermott as well. But let's not forget, he was benched momentarily, a third of the way through last season. And who knows if would he have still been benched? Was it just to send a message? We don't really know. But his play definitely showed that it was deserving. So he's kind of, at the end of the day, I don't think he's going to be on the team after this year, regardless. I think he will command a little bit of extra money, more than he's valued and more than we frankly value the position. So, I don't see him on this roster after this year, regardless if he takes that next step or not.
EJ, what are your thoughts?
It's funny that we're talking about this because I actually wrote an article on Terron Johnson on Friday, going up on the Cold Front Report site. So I'm very well versed in this topic. This is what I think about Terron Johnson. I think that Bills Mafia collective minds gets a little skewed saying that he had a great year. He, however, ended the year as the Bills' best coverage guy the last 10 weeks of the season. He had a 70-plus coverage grade. He was pretty good down the stretch. He actually this year had his career game against Pittsburgh. He had a 91.8 grade that game and a 91.4 coverage grade that game. He also had a couple games in between down the stretch where he had a 70-plus coverage grades too. But as Travis alluded to, he spent most of the year getting torched by opposing offenses. So after he got benched, that is when he picked it up. So the fact that he had to pick up his play after he got benched is very alarming to me. As I've said many times, the Bills need to seriously consider upgrading that spot. He had 10 games this year where he graded as a coverage grade under 50 or 50 and below. So, I mean, if you guys love this type of play on a consistent level, I say keep him. But I think the Bills can get better. He's a 4th-round pick. I think the Bills, again, should value this position a little higher just because of the amount of nickel that they play on a consistent basis. And one other thing I'll bring in is look at the importance of the slot corner and look how big it has become. If you look at the playoff run from the Chiefs and the Bucks, Sean Murphy-Bunting, the cornerback that they drafted in the 2nd round, probably played his best football in the playoffs. And then the Chiefs drafted L'Jarius Sneed, who had a 70 coverage grade this year, but he did that at safety, nickel corner, and outside corner. So that's the type of versatility. That's the type of impact that your slot corner can have. And for all intents and purposes, Terron Johnson has been the 10th best slot corner since 2019 with a 66.4 grade. If the Bills could get like a close to a 70 grade out of that slot corner position, I think they'd be in better shape to deal with these teams like the Chiefs, like Tampa Bay, who put their best guys like Chris Godwin and Travis Kelce in the slot consistently to attack guys like Terron Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, Terron Johnson, you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said on the onset of your point about how you feel that Bills fans' opinions of Terron Johnson is kind of skewed given the 2 interceptions. I mean, those were 2 really exciting plays and 2 game-changing plays and games that meant a lot to the Bills and meant a lot to Bills fans alike. So I understand how fans kind of feel in that atmosphere, in that regard of Terron Johnson. But talking solely about Terron Johnson's play, when he first came to the Bills, I like Terron Johnson. I like him a lot. I like his aggressive nature. I like how he's not afraid to stick his nose in the pile. I like how he's a contributor in the run game, and I like his aggressive mentality when he comes to the field. But him playing forward has never been the problem from Terron Johnson. Him attacking has never been the problem. His instincts and his ability to read wide receivers right at the line of scrimmage and right out of their breaks, that's certainly a weakness of his, and that's a necessity of any slot corner in the NFL. I really don't think that is his ideal position. That's not me saying I think his ideal position is on the boundary. I think his ideal position in the NFL is at safety. But as long as he's at nickel corner, I really don't think he's providing the service that the Bills really need in that position right there in that spot. I don't think he has this. He has the skill set. He just doesn't necessarily have the instincts to play that spot, or at least ideally, in my opinion. I mean, you saw the Bills really get torched up by nickel or by slot wide receivers, particularly like Isaiah Ford, players like Cooper Kupp, players like Robert Woods, players in that first stretch of the season when Travis mentioned he got benched, players that really torched him up and really gave him trouble in this Bills defense, a lot of troubles. And when you look at the leaks in the Bills secondary, if you're asking me, Terron Johnson is the biggest liability in the Bills secondary and was a lot of the reason as to why the Bills pass defense struggled at times last year. So I'm not exactly all that high on Terron Johnson. If you're asking me, he's a passable nickel corner, and he's no much better and he's no less than that. I think you can do better, but you can certainly do worse. So when I say the Bills can do better in that spot, that's something that I really hope that they would seek out in this offseason. I mean, we didn't see that come to fruition. They didn't really target cornerback all that much, aside from the day 3 of the draft when they drafted players like Rashad Wildgoose and Damar Hamlin. But the Bills do have options at this position. One player that I've been really high on and getting an opportunity in that spot is Siran Neal. We saw Dean Marlowe leave the Bills this past offseason in free agency and sign a contract elsewhere. And anytime you saw the Bills come out in a quote-unquote big nickel package, you'd see them roll out Dean Marlowe to kind of get the matchup that they'd want, that they'd pull Terron Johnson off the field for. Well, now that Dean Marlowe's gone, you saw Siran Neal play that role at times when the Bills wanted to run that big nickel package, and they kind of went away from it more times than not. They were kind of getting beat up a little bit with it, but a couple more years in the league, a little more footing underneath him. He's turned himself into a special teams ace. EJ, what is your outlook for Siran Neal and the potential of him possibly sliding into the nickel package on certain downs for the Bills?
So I actually took a look at his grading profile, his PFF grading profile, and I took a look at some of his tape. He is 6 foot, if I'm not mistaken, 208 or something like 6'1" or 6 foot, 208. That's pretty big for that slot cornerback position. And I also looked at his coverage profile, and it was actually pretty solid for a guy who had limited snaps and who was also a special teams ace. So if Siran Neal was to even just give you solid play, it doesn't even have to be great, 80-plus graded play. If you just give him just average play out of that position, just be consistent. Just don't get beat for like 5 or 6 first downs, per game. I think he can really carve out a niche and take over this slot cornerback position, because he has, first and foremost, he has the ideal size that you look for in that position. And if you can get a guy with size who can flip his hips, then you gotta ace there. But we have not seen Siran Neal go against these elite slot corners, wide receivers that play more than half their snaps in the slot. Like the top 3 graded receivers 3 years ago had majority of their snaps in the slot. So what is it going to be like when he has to cover a Keenan Allen? What is it going to be like when he has to cover a Tyreek Hill or a Travis Kelce or Chris Godwin or Mike Evans? What is it going to look like when he has to cover those guys? We haven't seen enough high-end play from him. So I think if with another year in the league with his grading profile that's saying, hey, he may have something here, I'm willing to take a risk on it and give him more snaps to see what we have.
I tend to agree. Travis, how do you feel about Siran Neal and his potential role for the Bills?
Yeah, Siran Neal is a very intriguing player because, at least with my eye, there was nothing he did to limit his role. I think it was his rookie season. We saw him on the field way more than we saw him last year, if at all. This coaching staff really seems to be patient with his players, give them the opportunities, even when they make mistakes. I mean, see Levi Wallace, whether it's platooning the guy or just keeping him in there. I don't think Siran Neal got that fair shot really with, live action. Now, who knows what goes on during practice, but this guy seems like you said, a core special teamers, and you find that those guys have some type of character to them because there's a lot of selflessness in being a special teamer. So I don't think it has anything to do with his attitude or anything like that. So, to answer your question, I would love to see what he's got because as I said earlier, when we were going through the ideal, skill set, he's got it for me. He's got a little bit of everything. He's fast enough. He certainly has the size, like EJ mentioned, and he's been here. He's a veteran now, so it's somebody I would hope that they would give the shot, and I'd definitely be comfortable seeing him in there in a role, or at least have a role for himself.
Yeah, after a couple seasons in the league, I assumed that, well, not assumed, but you'd figure that a player such as Tyron Neal, who has been a special teams ace for the last couple of years for the Bills, would have carved himself out a role on this defense. This year very well could be that year. And before we came live, I was talking to these guys behind the scenes, and really kind of the ideal player for this position, in my opinion, would be a player between the skill set of that of Tyron Neal and Terron Johnson, a player that can do what Tyron Neal does and also do what Terron Johnson can do. And, Tyron Neal, I don't think at any point that he is going to be a full-time nickel corner for the Bills. What I do think, however, is that he's a potential player that they could throw out there on early downs, on rush downs, if they want to run their nickel package, a bigger nickel package. That's what they call it. That's how they run it. And, that could bode well for the Bills. Tyron Neal, if his instincts, I really think what has held him back is his instincts for dropping back in that zone. I don't think because keep in mind, he went to Jackson State. He was a player that played a little bit in the corner, played a little bit of safety, played a little bit of linebacker. He played all over that defense. He was asked to do all sorts of different things, from blitzing, from maintaining gaps, from maintaining zones, from maintaining men. He had a lot of different roles in that defense. So that's why he was a tweener type player. And that's really, he was really kind of the first example of a tweener type player the Bills bringing in, and they brought him in the 5th round. And, he really hasn't come to fruition of being that model player like a Kyle Duggar, a player that they can throw in there in the nickel package that can, kind of sub for a linebacker, but also can play that sub package at the same time. If you ask me, Tyron Neal, if he's going to get snaps in the nickel package, he's going to get limited snaps. He's going to get early down snaps. I just simply don't think, as EJ was talking about, I don't think he can hang with those elite slot corners on the late passing downs, on 3rd and 15s or on 3rd and 10s. I don't think he's capable of hanging with, quick-footed wide receivers and having that lateral quickness and instinctual ability to really be the kind of ideal player in those situations. However, when he is attacking, when he is moving forward, when he is blitzing, when he's attacking a gap, I think you could find Tyron Neal, you can carve him out a really solid role in this defense, and he's built to kind of play that role. I just don't see it coming to fruition this season. I don't see Tyron Neal really kind of carving himself out that consistent role. He could potentially be thrown in there on certain downs, absolutely, but maybe I don't think he's going to be the starting nickel corner for the Bills. But a player that we can't forget about, that I was really high on last camp, and I was really, when I got to see what he was doing, I was shocked that he wasn't given more of an opportunity than he was. Cam Lewis. And Travis, you had to remind me of Cam Lewis last week when I was discussing the topic with you. Tell me what you think about Cam Lewis and what he could potentially bring to the Bills this season in the nickel competition.
Well, I mean, being a Buffalo guy, that's also he's going to have the Duke Williams or around him. Everyone's going to be clamoring for a guy like him, and he doesn't. Him and they may not have the same skill set, but him and Dame Jackson kind of remind me a lot of each other with their scrappiness, their willingness to put their body out there. So he's a guy who obviously stepped in for sure, albeit brief, spot for Terron Johnson after they benched him. So we didn't really get a good look at what he could bring to the table. EJ, I'm sure you have more on his metrics and whatnot. But again, just being the fact that he earned a chance to start on that defense gives you some pause into, crowning Terron Johnson the starter.
EJ, what are you thinking?
I remember doing something on Cam Lewis when he was coming out. I remember that he had really good ball skills. I remember watching him on tape, and I was just like, man, they really need to get this guy a shot, because he seemed to always be around the football. He seemed to always be playing the catch point pretty well. I'm looking at his grading profile right now. He only played in 2 games. That was against Tennessee and Kansas City, and both of those games he did not play particularly well. Granted, he only had a couple coverage snaps. I think in the Week 5 game against Tennessee, he had 33 coverage snaps and produced a 57.9 grade. So I don't think this is enough of a sample size to say, hey, we got something or hey, we don't have anything. I think guys need to have a fair shot, and to show what they have. Because you look at guys like a seventh rounder like AB, who thought that AB was going to be AB until he actually got a shot. And, Cameron Lewis is a UDFA, so I don't really feel like you would be losing anything to at least show what you have. But saying that, I think this preseason will be huge for him to show that, hey, I got something to prove too. Like I said, when I saw him on tape, when I watched him coming out, he had great ball skills, and he was always around the ball and always around the catch point. So I would love to see him do that. But based on this grading profile that he has, like he has a 52.1 defensive grade for his career, or for the one season. I can't really put too much into that right now. So I would like to see what he does in preseason. See how he reacts, see how he is in the ball skills, see if what I saw on tape comes to fruition in the preseason. And that's what hurts because of COVID. We weren't able to see much of him because of that. And so now we're sitting here, just trying to prognosticate, so to speak, on what he can and can't do.
Right. That was really my the bad thing about Cam Lewis is he wasn't really afforded the opportunity to have a preseason, to have those extra snaps and get the opportunity to really kind of show what he is capable of out in a live action play or out against players that aren't his own teammates. That's really what I felt like was the biggest downfall for Cam Lewis. I felt like if he got that opportunity, he may have carved himself out a role potentially in that defense. You never know. They don't really – I feel like this coaching staff is very stubborn with their defensive backfield particularly. Mm-hmm. They are extremely stubborn in what they look for. They're extremely stubborn in who they send out there and how they know their system. That's why I'm of the belief that Terron Johnson is going to be the nickel corner this year. And after this year is really kind of the question. That's really where you start, having the question marks of Cam Lewis, maybe Siran Neal, even though his contract's coming up as well. The person we're going to talk about next, Damar Hamlin. But Cam Lewis is going to be afforded an opportunity this year to play that nickel spot and also play on the boundary, because when he got game time against the Chiefs and against the Titans, he was thrown out there on the boundary and on the nickel. So I'm intrigued to see really kind of what do the Bills have in Cam Lewis. I'm really kind of intrigued to see what exactly he's going to do with those opportunities, if he's going to be a player that the Bills potentially, have a diamond in the rough, a player that they signed right out of Buffalo that's a UDFA that they developed for a year. You never really know. Maybe that year off, a year behind the scenes was really, he could have really used that. And, he knows the defense a lot better than he did when he came into Buffalo, obviously. And, time will tell. The preseason will tell. We'll see how Cam Lewis pans out in the preseason. I think he's going to have a good preseason. I think, he's going to put his name in the hat for that role or potentially fight for some snaps with Terron Johnson by the time the season comes. But a player I'm really intrigued with, the player that drafted in the sixth round out of Pitt, Damar Hamlin. I really like Damar Hamlin. I really like what the Bills added in Damar Hamlin and the leader and the football player and the person. I think Damar Hamlin is everything this team looks for in a player in their defensive backfield, a person who's not afraid to come attack the backfield, not afraid to attack the running backs. He's not afraid to cover big-time wide receivers and stand in the slot. I think Damar Hamlin could potentially be that slot corner that the Bills have been missing, could potentially be the diamond in the rough, and I don't think this season's really going to be the year for that. I think the year afterwards, when Terron Johnson, I don't expect Terron Johnson to re-sign in Buffalo after this season. I expect that to be a hole that they're going to kind of have question marks going into the 2022 offseason. I really kind of expect Damar Hamlin to fit into that role. I think very highly of Damar Hamlin. I see his instincts on film, and he's a very decisive football player. He knows what he's going to do with his feet. He knows the gaps he's attacking. He knows where he's going when he's attacking the football. He's a very aggressive player. That's the kind of player I really like to see in the nickel defense. Terron Johnson has that attitude. Siran Neal has that attitude. I think in order to play the nickel defender in today's NFL, you need to be able to have that mentality. And Damar Hamlin has the mentality. He also has the ability with his instincts. I'm just hoping that translates to the next level. EJ, what are your thoughts on the Bills' sixth round pick and Damar Hamlin?
I like it. I like him enough to see what he has. They drafted him, and like I told you off air, Bills have drafted. Well, I felt that the Bills have drafted really well late. So if they decided to pick this guy, again, he played with Dane Jackson, so that's another comfortability factor. So they must have seen something in him. But I'm looking at where he lined up in college and what he did. He had 400 plus coverage snaps 3 years in a row in the slot. His slot coverage grade wasn't great, but it shows you that he can do it. He is a versatile piece. And also to your point, to take it a step further, Poyer and Hyde's contracts are coming up also. So this defensive backfield can look really different come next season because you're going to have Levi Wallace, who's on a 1-year, $900K deal. You got Poyer and Hyde coming up, and then you got Terron Johnson too. So this secondary could look really different, and you can have so many different layers to it, but they have a lot of very versatile pieces that they have, and Damar Hamlin will be one of those versatile pieces that they have, a guy that can play safety and a guy that can play slot corner. Very versatile guy who can probably add some depth for them, worst comes to worst. But I'm interested to see what he play. No one thought Dane Jackson was going to show the flashes he did, so hoping we get the same type of outlook for Damar Hamlin.
Travis, how do you feel about Damar Hamlin?
I love Damar Hamlin as a player, specifically his versatility, like you guys mentioned. That is above all that and tackling is what our coaches are looking for to play in the secondary. He has the size. He's 6'1". He's just under 200 pounds. He's got that frame to add more. If they do want him to play heavier, he offers that versatility of coming down. Like you said, he's done it before. I think the good problem to have, it could go either way, where there's going to be opportunity in the coming years. I don't think quite yet this year coming up, but like you said, we're going to have an opening at nickel. Poyer and Hyde aren't getting younger, and their contracts are not getting longer. So he is going to set himself up in a position to be coached, to really learn a position. And I hope they don't flip-flop him too much, although it does seem like those corners to safety to corners, the transition is a little easier, because we do have two in our safeties with Poyer and Hyde. Poyer and Hyde. I could see him being nickel, but I don't think it would be right away. And I just love his flexibility of being able to do both and have done both.
Yeah, I really think, they kind of have a player that they were looking for in Damar Hamlin. I think he has a lot of potential in this scheme. I think he has a lot of potential in that role that specifically that we were talking about. Coming into this preseason, primarily the last three names that we spoke of, Saran Neal, Cam Lewis, and Damar Hamlin, I'm really, really excited to see what those three players specifically have to bring this preseason. Because, you look at the transition the Bills have made since the last time we watched a preseason. The last time there was a preseason, the Bills, they had open competitions on their starting roster. They had spots that were up in the air. And whereas, you skip a whole year without a preseason and you come into this year where, the Bills are Super Bowl contenders. This is really where we start to see the bottom of the roster competitions throughout the entirety of the preseason. The Bills mostly have their starting lineup settled and decided on. This is where a lot of players are going to have to earn roster spots for for the next season in that preseason. The work that they're going to be putting in this preseason is going to dictate, their employment going forward. Similar to how you can compare that to how players like Isaiah McKenzie, the 7 games that he played a vital role for the Bills in 2018, whereas we look back on those times like, oh, well, the Bills didn't really have any receivers. That was kind of an open competition. Nobody really kind of took that spot aside from Isaiah McKenzie. That role that he found himself in 2018 when he was picked up off of waivers, that turned into a lot of contracts for Isaiah McKenzie. Whereas for a player like Ray McLeod, who was also competing at that time, he's kind of bounced around the league and, he's carved himself out a role as a punt returner for the Steelers, but, he still got caught a couple times. I'm really excited for this preseason. I think you're going to see a lot of competition on the bottom end of the roster. I think you're going to see a lot of competition from the defensive backfield because, like EJ mentioned, there's a lot of turnover upcoming for this backfield that they're going to have a lot of decisions upcoming on. I'm excited to see what they're going to do. Like I already said, I don't think Terron Johnson's spot is really in entirety in jeopardy this upcoming season, but I want to ask you guys, what really are your expectations for this year and the defensive backfield, and specifically that nickel spot, and what Terron Johnson or the slew of corners that the Bills could potentially put there? What are your expectations for that role in this defense, and if it'll improve or regress from last season? EJ, what do you think?
So I had said before that the Bills offense allowed the Bills defense to be average. I think we all can agree that the defense was average because the offense was so great last year. Now, I don't think they're going to be afforded that same opportunity this year to be average due to the fact that they will be the hunted team this year. one game away from the Super Bowl. Teams are going to come for them, and they're going to play the Bills differently. The Bills are no longer this team that's in the basement and it's going to sneak up on everybody. They are not that team anymore. They are a contending team that actually has a legitimate shot at winning the Super Bowl. Specifically on defense, they will have to improve covering on the back end. I know no one thinks that it's an issue, but it is. I have said many times that I think more than the pass rush, I think the back end is an issue. You guys love Tre'Davious White. I won't touch that today. But in terms of everyone else on the back end, they all, besides Poyer and Hyde, but they all need to play better. Levi, Terron Johnson, all of them need to play better for the Bills to have the same success or similar success next season. And Terron Johnson, again, will be a big part of that because now teams are going to attack him. Watch what I tell you. Teams are going to attack him. He played better down the stretch last year, but that was a small stretch and a small sample size. So anybody can play good in the 3 or 4 game, 5 game stretch, but can you be consistent through the whole season? Terron Johnson has not shown us that he can do that. And like you mentioned before, he's been nicked up too. So in that will leave opportunities for other guys to come and step up, the Cam Lewises, the Teron Neals, the Damar Hamlins, even maybe Rashad Walgoose, even though he played outside corner at Wisconsin, even him, even he might come in and emerge as a slot corner. I am willing, I would hope McDermott is willing to try anything on his back end. I know, again, I'm going to start by saying again that I know no one thinks the back end is an issue, but it is an issue when they play these better teams. When they play the Chiefs, when they play the Bucs this year too, you're going to see how much of an issue that is going to be.
Yeah, you're spot on, EJ. Travis, what are your thoughts? How you feeling about the Bills' nickel corner spot going into 2021? You're muted.
Sorry. To roll over with what EJ was saying, there was an issue. How many times did we see last year where our defense was getting specifically our defensive backs just getting eaten alive? Guys catching balls where defensive backs were 10 yards away. That was something that we didn't see years prior out of the McDermott defense. And, some fans may chalk it up to, we were playing conservative. Yeah, but we may have been playing conservative, but that still doesn't mean we're supposed to be blowing assignments and, giving that much space. Now, what I do expect is better communication with having an off season. I'm hoping that they'll be able to run. It seemed, and this may have just been, I'm grabbing at straws, but it seemed like they were a little bit more vanilla in their schemes last year than years prior. We didn't see as much of that A-gap pressure, which was very effective in 2019. So I'm hoping that with a full off season, and like we just mentioned, and we boiled it down to, this is going to be a big camp for a lot of these guys, specifically nickel. So with the competition, with the added time to really get used to playing with each other again, I'm hoping for improvement, going back more to a 2018, 2019 defensive backfield. But like EJ mentioned, they're going to be gunning for us. And, the teams aren't going to be watching Terron Johnson running 101 yards down the field. No, they're going to be watching the routes that he got smoked on. And there were more of that than interceptions returned for a touchdown. So, just because he's a playmaker doesn't mean guys they're not going to be gunning for him.
Absolutely. Go ahead, EJ. You had something to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, as we were talking, to take it a step further, you were talking about the teams that are going to be running outside zone this year. And the Bills struggled mightily with outside zones base scheme teams last year. The Jets will be running outside zones base scheme this year. Zach Wilson ran outside zone base scheme in college, and then they got the Atlanta Falcons on the roster who just got on their schedule, who just got Arthur Smith, who ran an outside zone system with Tennessee. They struggle mightily with outside zone system. So that's another thing that teams are going to be looking to attack the Bills with. The Bills do not have players, especially at linebacker, who have the greatest instincts when it comes to eye candy, when it comes to showing you different looks, pre-snap motion, all of that stuff you see from the Niners and all of that stuff you see from the Rams. They do not do well with that. So that's another thing to look for this year. How much teams use pre-snap motion against the Bills to confuse guys like Tremaine Edmonds, who is not the best guy at instinctual and being eye disciplined with his eyes. So that's another thing to be looking out for.
Really for the Bills defense as a whole, just given how much synergy that the defense has to operate with in order to be functional, in order to be efficient, in order to be an attacking, aggressive defense and not have that vanilla conservative look that, a lot of fans, are quick to point out. And, you watch film, they could send 5-6 guys, that's not conservative, but it looks like it is if they're all getting picked up and the quarterback has as long as he wants to have to pass that ball back there. And that's really what happened a lot of times to this Bills defense. They got bottled up and they couldn't get to the quarterback. They couldn't get pressure with extra guys, let alone the front four like they like to use that. Like this defense is really predicated on. So really the three names that I want everybody to look at this year, and everyone's going to recognize them. Mm-hmm. The three names I'm looking for improvement from this year for the Bills defense in its entirety are Star Lotulelei, who's hopefully going to be there, and he looks like he's in shape. He looks like he needs to eat some chicken wings and get his ass to Buffalo and add some weight. And then Tremaine Edmonds, I'm looking for his instincts to improve. I'm looking for him to just grow as a football player as he has in the previous couple of years. I'm not saying the jury is still out on Tremaine Edmonds and what he can be, and the fact that remains going into his fourth season is insane. And it goes to tell you how much potential he really has. And I'm high on Tremaine Edmonds, but he did struggle at times last year, and I think that was due to the fact that Star Lotulelei was absent and Terron Johnson. Those are the three players that I'm really looking to improve or make a difference in 2021 in comparison to 2020, because those are the three areas in which the Bills, if you get improvement from those areas, you're going to watch that defense go from that mediocre defense that we watched last year to back to that aggressive style defense that you saw in 2019 that had defenses or had quarterbacks with their head spinning, with their safeties rotating all over the field, and also had, I'm really excited to see what the front of this defense can do, because that really impacts the back end a lot. Like I said, this defense is predicated on having four-man pressure and being able to drop the rest of the guys back into their zone, or having the linebacker blitz into the open gap. That's really what the defense is predicated on. And the fact that they threw as many darts at the dartboard on that defensive line as they could, adding two players in the first 2 days of the draft, and Gregor Rousseau and Carlos Basham, that goes a long way. And it's only a matter of time to find out if that comes to fruition for the Bills or if that doesn't work. I think they have the capabilities. They're not as limited as they were in 2020. So they have room for improvement, and they have potential for improvement going into 2021. And I think, I'm not going to say that that's definitively going to or not going to happen. It certainly could, and only time will tell, and we'll see what the Bills are going to do with the various positions, and we'll see how these competitions pan out. It was a great show tonight, guys. I appreciate everybody for tuning in and watching. Before we get out of here, I want you guys to tell the people where they can find you. Travis, I'll start with you.
You can find me on Twitter at Trav Bixley, and doing some more podcasts with you guys later in the weeks.
Absolutely. EJ, what do you got going on? Where can the people find it?
I have an article coming out about Terron Johnson and his misleading PFF coverage grade. And you can find me at eDaniel77 on Twitter. I am actually in a Twitter beef/debate right now as we
When
speak.
aren't you?
Right, exactly. Which means that I'm always here for your hot takes, whatever football takes it is. Specifically Bills, we can discuss that all day. So again, at eDaniel77, just come hit me, and I'm all for it. I'm here for it.
I feel like you kind of like poking the bear, though.
Is it poking the bear or is it telling facts? Which one is it?
It could be both. It could be both for sure.
You can do both at the same time.
There's no there's no take that I have given that has not been factual. That has not instinctively been like, oh, I'm trying to poke the bear. It's been factual. It's been research. The biggest one they give me flack about is the Trey White thing. But what I say is factual though. You know what I mean? Like, I don't poke the bear. I state facts. And you guys don't like it because you guys value these players a little bit higher than they actually is, or what they tape actually says that they are. That's
just the fans, though. You gotta let some fans be fans.
Nah.
We're going to the Super Bowl.
No. When they say stuff like Josh Allen is the best quarterback, hands down, and then there's no debate about it, I'm just supposed to let that rock?
Hey, man. Whatever keeps the people happy, you let them stay happy. Be sure to stay happy and follow the Cold Front Report everywhere we're at. Follow us on Twitter at Cold Front Report, on Instagram at Cold Front Report _Bills News, and be sure to like our Facebook page, Cold Front Report Buffalo Bills. If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at CFR Clayton. I'm not as active on there as I used to be, simply because I don't want to be. But on Instagram, you can find me there as well, at CFR Clayton. You can add my Facebook page. That's practically a group. You can add me on there. I really don't care. I'll accept your friend request if you're a Bills fan and you want to tune in at all the Bills coverage that we have coming from the Cold Front Report. Be sure to follow us everywhere. Be sure to like, subscribe on YouTube. I appreciate everybody watching. I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you all for tuning in to this edition of the Cold Front Report.